So we just got a new update on the cards that are available to use in character duels. We're not getting any new decks or any new characters that we could use, but we are getting new options that we can choose to play in the character duel decks that we are playing, which is really good news, not only because hopefully it will tone down some of the obviously better decks in the format like Automats and Resonators, and maybe buff those underdog decks like Red Eyes or Synchros or whatever. And also this shows that Konami just cares about this game mode enough to give us an update so quickly. It hasn't even been a month and we're already getting new stuff in the game mode already, which is really good. So let's have a look real quick and I'll kind of give my opinions on how I think the changes will affect the decks in the format and how I think the meta will change. So first is a correction. So these are some of the cards that have their limits changed. These are already in the game mode, but they have their limited amount of copies changed. And before I actually get into the cards, one thing you need to know, in case you don't, is that limited cards in this game mode have this restriction where only the deck that already has the limited card in the starting deck can play those limited cards. So, for example, if Wandering King Wildwind is limited to 3, only the Jack Atlas deck can play Wildwind. Any other deck won't even have the option to play this card because this is a limited card that is only present in the Jack Atlas deck. And it doesn't really matter in cards like Wildwind because that's a Resonator card anyway, but it does matter for cards like Hallowed Life Barrier because now that it's unlimited, any deck can play this card, which is a big deal. So, I guess let's get into it. Illusion Magician going from 1 to 2 is pretty good because this makes the Dark Magician deck less reliant on exactly Circle. Because at present, even though the Dark Magician deck isn't exactly that bad, it does heavily rely on Dark Magical Circle from sticking on the field to actually do their thing, and every deck basically has a way to remove back row, and once Magical Circle is removed, the deck really struggles. So having this as more copies in your deck allows you to kind of cover the weakness of the Dark Magician not having enough attack by having it being in your hand more often so that you can boost your Dark Magician's attack and not having to rely on the Dark Magical Circle every time to get rid of high attack monsters, which is pretty good. Wandering King Wildwind to 3 doesn't really affect the deck itself, but it does affect the limit-free cards that the deck could play, which there will be some limit-free cards that are newly added later on, and this card being ad-free just stops the Resonator deck from playing those cards, which is a really good change because the Resonator deck is a pretty good deck, and limiting the amount of stuff that deck can play is a good idea. And same with Automats, having Gaga Sister at limit free just ensures that deck can't play the good limit free cards that is in the game, and also prevents them from playing 2 Malevolent Sin because that card is also limit free. So they either have to choose between 2 Sister and 1 Sin or 1 Sister and 2 Sin, and I think the optimal ratio is probably 1 sister and 2 sin, because having 2 sin is pretty important for OTKing, because if you can make 2 rank 4s, you could make 2 of them and then clear 2 monsters and go for game. And Gaga Sister is searchable anyway, so having 1 or 2 copies doesn't really change that much. So that kind of just depends on your preference, honestly. The big change is Hallowed Life Barrier being unlimited. I don't know if I like this change, but it is okay, I think, because Hallowed Life Barrier doesn't really synergize that well with most decks because of the discard cost. You probably would want to play other generic options if you don't really have a use for the discard. For example, like Blue Eyes, they have good cards to discard with like White Stones. But for a deck like I don't know, Dark Magician, they don't really have that many good cards to discard, so you probably don't really want to play this card to just minus yourself for no reason, and you would probably rather play stuff like Book of Moon instead, or some of the other cards in the newly added card pool. But if you do want to play this card in say like a Resonator deck now, you have the option to do that. And that is kind of a buff to like decks like Resonator, where they are really, really good going second, but not they don't really have that much of a thing going first. But I don't think even decks like Resonator, they have a pretty solid going first game plan that pretty much ensures that they never die anyway, so it's probably not even going to be that good in a deck like that anyway. It's probably gonna be good in if you build your deck as a deck that OTKs. If like, for example, if you build Synchros as like an OTK deck, you might want to play this card, even if you don't really have a synergy with the discard cost. I don't know, it kind of just depends on your playstyle, I guess, but now you have the option to play this card in other decks, which is, I guess, nice. Anyway, Red Eyes Fang with Chain being unlimited is a long overdue change. It should have been uh, at the very beginning. The Red Eyes deck is just not good, and it's even less good that this card is limited to one, so now at least you have multiple of this card, which is not only good because you can use it multiple times, it also just means that your skill math works a bit better, because the Red Eye skill adds a random spell trap to your hand, which has always been kind of an annoying little thing that the deck just does, because like pretty much every other consistency skill is not random, and then just the Red Eye skill randomly is random, so that kind of sucks. And now you could kind of put the odds more in your favor just by having more copies of this card, which is nice. And now we move into the actual new cards that we got in the update. Veiler as a limit to one card is pretty interesting. I think that is only for the Yusei deck because it is limited to one, and you know that's where this card is played. It's from Yusei. That's pretty interesting, and is kind of a buff to the Yusei deck. And I think that is realistically not going to affect things too much. Decks like Blue Eyes don't even care about Veiler, but uh, having a single Veiler in the Yusei deck just means that it has a slightly better matchup against stuff that cares about Veiler, maybe like Automat and stuff, but it's just a slight boost, nothing too crazy. Doppel Warrior just allows the Synchron deck to have more options to synchro combo, because currently the only thing that you're doing is either normal summoning Junk Synchron and then doing the Junk Synchron combo, or special summoning Quick Draw Synchron and then doing the level 7 Synchro combo. It's just these two things these are the only two things that the deck does currently, and it's not very interesting. So having more options, more like good extenders to combo off of is a good idea in case you want to build your deck in more of a combo style OTK strategy, rather than just having one card combos and back row, for example. So Doppel Warrior just gives you more options in what synchros you can go into, which is a good idea if you want to make more synchros in a single turn. Stardust Spark Dragon is pretty huge because it is a Stardust Dragon monster that isn't Stardust Dragon and actually has a relevant effect. So currently you always go into Stardust Dragon going first because the skill gives you the trap that pops any card on the field while you control a Stardust monster. But Stardust Dragon doesn't really have a good quick effect against most matchups because it only negates effects that destroy. So in those situations, you can instead make discard, and discard has applications against pretty much every matchup, and it is harder to beat over by your opponent if they have higher attack monsters, which they usually will because Stardust doesn't really have that much attack. So it helps you survive. It still enables you to activate your trap. It's overall just a pretty good card. And also it prevents your opponent to get rid of it by a card effect that easily, which is also good against some matchups, even if you know your opponent has an effect to destroy your monsters. Silver's Cry revives Blue Eyes pretty much, and I don't think that's really a big deal in the Blue Eyes deck. You probably won't play this anyway. Needle Sing at a limit free is interesting. I don't actually know what deck this card is going to be available in because it is limited, which means it is going to be limited to a select character, but it is not in any of the starting characters' decks, so they might change the way that limited cards work in this format because, as I said at the very beginning, limited cards can only be played in decks that already have the limited cards in the starting decks. But Needle Sealing is obviously a new card and it's in none of the starting decks, but it is limited to 3. So I'm guessing that every deck could choose to play it, and if that's the case, it's only going to be good in some decks like Sharks primarily, because that deck is really lacking on good removal, and that deck can spam a lot of monsters, and those monsters have protection from being destroyed, so it works really well with Needle Sealing. Also, decks like Resonators might benefit with this card, which is probably why it's limited to 3, so that that deck can't play this card. But not too many decks could make use of the Needle Sealing being good, just because not a lot of decks spam that many monsters and have protection against your own pop. But definitely going to be a good option in a deck like Sharks, for example. Warding Point is a huge change because this is a generic trap that every deck could play. It is not limited in any way, and it is a good going first trap. So, previously the best option you have is Fiendish Chain, as a trap that doesn't have any cost and interrupts your opponent. But now Warding Point is just better because it also stops your opponent from using it as any sort of material. So if you're playing against a deck like Onomats, Fiendish Chain isn't that useful because even if you negate the Gaga Sister, they can still later on use something like a Gaga Bolt to pop your Fiendish Chain and then just continue to do their combos like nothing happened. But Warding Point is a one and done thing. It lasts for the entire turn. They can't use their monsters for any extra deck material, and their effects are negated as well. So a pretty good card, and it's probably going to be replacing Fiendish Chain in a lot of decks, unless Fiendish Chain is already in their starting deck. Burst Stream of Destruction is cool, I guess. It's more of a anime cosplay thing, not really going to be relevant, I think. Mistworm is probably not going to do too much. It's kind of difficult to summon, and it's pretty much only good in the Yusei deck. And that deck already has a lot of removal options in the extra deck already. Junk Destroyer pops, Junk Archer banishes. We probably aren't looking for a third option to get rid of cards on the field, but I guess it is nice. Just having this as an option, but it does eat up one of your grades, so not exactly sure if you want to do that. But Black Rose Moonlight Dragon probably has more applications than Mistworm. It is generic, it's still just pretty much going to be only seeing play in the Yusei deck, and you can't make this that easily because Quick Draw Synchron can only be used as a synchro material for synchro monsters that it can act as a substitute for. And Black Rose Moonlight Dragon is generic, which you can't use Quick Draw Synchron from. But it's still not that bad to make this card just by doing the Junk Synchron combo line by having the Hedgehog as 2 additional levels. And this card is just more removal options and potentially a going first option as well because it also triggers when your opponent special summons a level 5 or higher monster, which is good against some matchups. Cyber Dragon Noxter is good for the Cyber Dragon Nova version of the deck. Not really good if you're playing Fusion Gate. You don't really care about Noxter if you're playing Fusion Gate, but it does buff the Xyz strategy of the deck, which is nice. It gives more options for people to play, but realistically, I'm probably not going to be playing this card. World Legacy Clash, another limit-free generic spell. Pretty interesting one. It allows you to banish your own monsters as cost to potentially maybe dodge an effect that destroys your own monster and then lower your opponent's monster's attack and defense permanently. So this card back in the day in like 2020, I think, or 2019, is really, really good in a low-powered format as kind of a card that does everything. It lets you beat over your opponent's monsters. It lowers your opponent's attack, which means they don't deal that much damage to your life points. So it helps you survive. It is a card that you can use in the damage step, so you can make your opponent's monsters small so that they crash into your own monsters, and you can use it to dodge any sort of effects and have your monsters safely return to your field at the end phase. It's a really good card. It's a really fun card as well. And it was limited to 2 for the longest time, even way after this card was good in speed duels. But so glad that this card is going to be an option, at least in character duels. And yeah, hopefully it's not going to be too good, but it is limited to 3 after all, so um hopefully it's gonna be more fun than frustrating in this format. And then 2 more Yusei buffs, Turbo Warrior and Drill Warrior. None of these are really that good, and even though you can make them pretty easily with Quick Draw Synchron, I don't think it's worth making, and don't think it's worth the grades for. Cyber Dragon Herds is another Cyber Dragon card you could play. Again, probably good in Xyz focused Cyber Dragon deck because it does make your monsters level 5, and also probably can see play in like the Overflow control deck where you, instead of playing Fusion Gate, you just play heavy back row and then just control the field with the trap card. This card can maybe also see a bit of play in that version, but again, if you're playing Fusion Gate, this card doesn't really do anything. And finally, just the tuners for the 2 Synchros, Turbo and Drill Synchron. These cards are not good, you will not play them. And that's pretty much it for the new cards. And then these are the old limit changes that are already mentioned in the at the very top. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about these changes. Mostly I like these changes. I don't know if some of them I really like that much, like the Hallowed life barrier being unlimited. But realistically, I don't think most decks will even choose to play this card, even if it's unlimited. And there are like some cards that I am a tiny bit worried that would be a little bit too strong, but for the most part, I think it's fine. Nothing really changed that much. The best decks are slightly less good. You know, Ornaments and Resonators are slightly less good. The worst decks like Synchrons and Red Eyes are slightly better. Which is good because the gaps between these decks aren't that big anyway, because Konami did a pretty good job at balancing between all of the decks and character duels already. So yeah, also I am excited to see how they handle the limited cards, because if the new cards are being limited, that implies that there will be limited cards that will be available for every deck to play, and potentially cards like Veiler might even be a card that every deck could play, and that kind of changes things a little bit. But it is still a limited one card, so I'm not sure if that's gonna be a card worth playing, especially that Veiler isn't even that good against um every matchup. Like doesn't do anything against Blue Eyes, Neos, and even decks like Resonators. They can just play through Veiler pretty easily. So yeah, pretty excited to see how this changes the meta, and I will be making content on the new updates on the cards as soon as they come out, hopefully, probably. So yeah, thanks for watching, goodbye.